I'm going back to college soon, and while I have a full kitchen at my apartment, I don't really have a good baking setup. And I want some cookies for my lunches. I like to have a cookie as part of my lunch every day. These are an oatmeal chocolate chip cookie that I used to sell at a local farmer's market for quite a number of years when I was a young kid. I particularly like these cookies because they aren't like super sweet and they have a kind of a good crunch and substance to them, as opposed to a lot of cookies which are just like really wafers that are just like sugar wafers is how I think of them. I've made so many of these that I almost know the recipe by heart, which is you need 1 cup of like fat or oil, which we always do by 1 stick of room temperature butter and half a cup of oil. And then 1.5 cups of sugar. And 2 tablespoons of molasses, though I've never measured it. It's just kind of guessing about the right amount of molasses. And this is blackstrap molasses as opposed to sweetened molasses. And then blend it until it's really nicely whipped up. And that looks like it was slightly too much molasses. And then 2 room temperature eggs. Though these eggs are room temperature in this version, they don't have to be. It helps if they are. And blend them in. Normally we use rolled oats, but because I just recently got a lot of quick oats for cheap, I'm going to use quick oats instead. And it's 3 cups of rolled oats, but I'm going to put in slightly fewer quick oats. Normally I do this in 2 batches. So like 1.5 cups of rolled oats and 1.5 cups of rolled oats, because if you put too much in, it will just go everywhere. A little bit of salt, 2 teaspoons of baking powder, and then it's time to add flour. 3 cups of whole wheat flour in total, normally added in 3 batches of 1 cup each, to prevent like it fluffing up and flying everywhere. After you start adding flour, it's important to limit the mixing to an absolute minimum, because mixing flour promotes gluten, and with cookies you don't want gluten, unlike bread where you mix it a lot. And this mixer is slightly broken and doesn't have a stir function, so it's particularly messy. This is the point where you add the chocolate chips or sometimes raisins. In this case I'm using chocolate chips, but oftentimes we'll also use raisins. It's 1.5 cups worth. At this point, if it's a little bit too dry and crumbly, milk or water can be added to get it to the right consistency. But I think that this is the right consistency right now, possibly because of the extra molasses I added. So I don't think I'm going to add any milk or water. just run this for a bit more before scooping it out. This is the base recipe, and slight alterations can be made. Sometimes we won't add quite as much flour is one of the things, but generally this works out quite well. And make sure to clean up all the flour that got knocked out of it. My mom wouldn't be happy if this got left here. Scooping the cookies out onto, this is a non-stick like sheet to go on baking sheets, but a oiled pan, greased pan will work just fine. Then squish them down and kind of reform them. And yes, I have washed my hands before doing this. So this recipe makes about 36 cookies, generally one or two more than that, but sometimes we get only 34 from it. Not quite sure what's the variation is, probably our cookie scooping, but somewhere between 34 and 40, around 36. So once these are all smushed down and in kind of nice ways, they go into preheated to 350 Fahrenheit oven for about 10 minutes. And the reason I'm smushing them down is just to make them more what they want, like more flattened, so they, I don't know, nicer cookie to eat. But you don't want to smush them all the way because they will expand and flatten out. Also reforming them so they aren't quite the they don't have as many loose bits that will burn. After 7 minutes, which is what I set the timer for, it's a good idea to switch the pans on the top and bottom, and in the meantime I've got a pan onto the bottom. It also gives you a chance to look at the cookies and see how done they are. After a couple more minutes and some checking later, cookies are done, and take them out. That was probably a bit more than 10 minutes, but the 10 minutes is just a guide, and you should check them to make sure that they're where you exactly want them done-wise. A couple minutes later, once they've cooled enough to solidify them, I'm transferring them onto a cooling rack so their bottoms can let any excess steam out, and so they get a bit crunchy, as opposed to if they're to sit on the pan, they would, one, stick to this pretty badly, and two, they wouldn't be quite as nice and crunchy. I didn't mention it earlier, but these cookies have a name. My name, Kestrel cookies, is the name given to these cookies. The reason for this name is when I was really little, I used to help my mom make these, and the people she was giving them to heard that I was making them and called them Kestrel cookies because I was helping making them. When I sold these at the farmer's market, I sold them as Kestrel cookies, and I happen to really like them. They're certainly good when they're fresh, but I happen to like them a bit more after a couple days or once they've been frozen. The reason is I feel after frozen or just kind of sitting around for a couple days, they lose a little bit of their water, and that makes them a little bit crunchier and more satisfying. Just my personal preference.